Okay, now we move on to conclusions. So, how do you write a good concluding paragraph? Well, first off, as I did with the introductions or the lead-ins, I have several of the book suggestions that I'm asking you to avoid in this particular class. Number one, and the one that you are probably most inclined to use, and I'm going to tell you don't do it, is a summary of the thesis and the essay's major points. Your essays are going to be 2 to 3 pages long. I don't need to have you repeat everything you've just told me. If you're writing a long essay, like let's say 15 or more pages, then yes, you would need to go back and hit your major points because the reader needs to see these things, again, so that the reader can take the main ideas of the essay away. With your essays, because they're so short, there's no reason, there's no need to do that. So do not summarize your thesis and your essay's major points. Do not use a quotation, okay? Just like in the introduction. I don't like quotations. I think they're very poorly done, generally speaking. Same thing with rhetorical questions. I don't want it in the introduction. I don't want it in the conclusion. And no, I don't think that you can do at this point an ironic twist or a witticism or a pun or a playful use of words. I'm not saying that you can't try to do it. I'm just saying that don't hang your conclusion on this particular strategy because I've seen very few students who are able to do this successfully. Now, we'll go ahead and move on to some recommended suggestions now. Okay. Again, I'll say this before I begin. Some of the examples here are too short for the assignments that I'm going to be giving you in this class, but they do give you a suggestion of what direction to go in with your conclusions. And here's the first example, the evaluation of an evaluation of the importance of the essay's subject. If you are writing about something, if you think it's important, you may want to conclude the essay by taking into account the overall importance of the subject you have written. These amazing controversial photographs of the comet will continue to be the subject of debate because, according to some scientists, they yield the most important clues yet revealed about the origin of the universe. If you're writing about photographs of comets, then you would want to talk about why overall these photographs are significant not just to scientists, but to people in general. Another strategy, similar to what we just looked at, is a statement of the essay's broader implications. In other words, how does this apply to a broad range of concerns above and beyond what you've touched on in the essay? And the example we have here, again, just one sentence, so it's too short, is because these studies of feline leukemia may someday play a crucial role in the discovery of a cure for AIDS in human beings, the experiments, as expensive as they are, must continue. So that does, if it were developed a little bit more, that would provide a very good conclusion to an essay on studies of feline leukemia. Another effective conclusion, especially with an argumentative essay, which you're not reading or writing in this class this semester, is a recommendation or call to action. Here's an example. The specific details surrounding the death of World War II hero Raoul Wallenberg are still unknown, although Russia has recently admitted, after 50 years of denial, that Wallenberg was murdered by the KGB in 1947. Such a confession is not enough. We must write our congressional representatives today urging their support for the new Swedish commission investigating the circumstances of his death. No hero deserves less. Now, obviously, this essay is about the death of a World War II hero and the specific details that are unknown to us. And what the writer is asking, having put forth all of this information, is a call to action to contact congressmen and senators and have them support a commission that's investigating the circumstances. Again, this is a very effective way of of concluding an essay. Another option is to conclude with a warning based on the essay's thesis. Again, that doesn't necessarily work with every particular essay, but in some it might. Here's an example of one that does. Again, this is pretty short. It would not be sufficient for the assignments in this class. Nevertheless, it does point a direction. Understanding the politics that led to the destruction of Hiroshima is essential for all Americans, indeed for all the world's peoples. Without such knowledge, the frightful possibility exists that somewhere, sometime, someone might drop the bomb again. So here we have a warning. You need to understand the circumstances and the politics surrounding them in order to theoretically prevent the kind of nuclear attack that happened there from happening again. In some instances, you may have noticed that some of the strategies that are suggested for the conclusion correspond to some of the strategies that were suggested for the introduction. Here is a similar one, an anecdote or brief example that emphasizes or sums up the point of the essay. This is very clearly an essay on the great Bette Davis, major star of the early days of Hollywood. And indeed, the descriptions here are all very good, and this line at the end is very funny from All About Eve. Bette Davis's role on and off screen, or on and off the screen, as the catty, wisecracking woman of steel helped make her an enduring star. After all, no audience, past or present, could ever resist a dame who drags on a cigarette and then mutters about a passing starlet, "There goes a good time that was had by all." So, at any rate, that's if you're writing about how Bette Davis was an enduring star because of her wisecracking, her cattiness, her strength, then this is an anecdote that does, in many respects, encompass all of that. Therefore, very good. Another possible way to conclude an essay is with an image or a description that lends finality to the essay. Bear in mind, what you're trying to do is to tie up loose ends. You're trying to create a sense of closure, or in this case, as the wording of the textbook goes, finality to the essay. So here we have clearly a description of certain cinematic films of the 1950s that revealed the concern that Americans had, and not just Americans but other nations as well, with the Cold War and the advent of nuclear power. I don't mean necessarily nuclear power, but nuclear radiation. This, by the way, is a little bit of a side note here. This is a description of one of my favorite films from childhood, a film called Them, about giant ants in New Mexico that had been mutated because of the atomic testing that occurred there at Los Alamos. It is a classic B-movie, sci-fi horror film, again, that it looks a little bit certainly in terms of special effects not very good compared to nowadays, but there is some charm and enjoyment in watching it. So I remember watching that in New Orleans one Saturday afternoon. At any rate, here's the conclusion. As the last of the big screen's giant ants are incinerated by the army scientists, one can almost hear the movie audiences of the 1950s breathing a collective sigh of relief, secure in the knowledge that once again the threat of nuclear radiation had been vanquished by the efforts of the U.S. military. So whatever the essay is, and we can get a sense of it from this particular conclusion, although again it's too short because it's only one sentence, we do get a sense of finality, right, using the ending of the film as a way of creating an ending for the essay. This particular strategy is a little tricky, forecast based on the essay's thesis, because it's very dangerous to forecast things. In other words, you're making a prediction about the future. And anybody who has looked at weather reports or has gone to a medium to have a fortune told, whether by tarot cards or whatever, you know that these things are, you know, dubious in many respects. Nevertheless, if you can produce a reasonable forecast, then that is a good way to end an essay. Here we have one of those. And notice that the writer is being specific about what kind of reality TV shows that he or she is writing about. Again, this is only one sentence, too short for any of the essays you'll be writing in this class, but this gives you, again, a sense of direction. Reality TV shows that are competition based, contestants singing, dancing, cooking, etc., will continue to be popular not only because they invite viewers to imagine themselves as powerful judges, but also because such shows are easier and cheaper for networks to produce than scripted dramas or comedies. So this is a reasonable prediction. As long as this is the case, as long as people want to feel this way, and as long as they're cheap to produce, then they're going to continue to be produced. Personally, I wish they'd stop being produced, but nevertheless, I am not the one who dictates what goes on television. Our final strategy for concluding an essay is returning to the technique used in your lead-in. Depending on if you're using an anecdote or reference to something, or if you're talking about a particular circumstance and then you write an essay that comes out of that, you might return to the anecdote or the circumstance in the conclusion. Obviously, the writer here, and this is a good conclusion, the writer here uses Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz to set up an analogy between her situation of leaving Kansas and then wanting to get back, and his situation of going to work in Wyoming. And so this is what he presents. He returns to this statement or this anecdote. So was Dorothy right in The Wizard of Oz? After a tough summer spent on our ranch in Wyoming, mending barbed wire fences and wrestling calves, I could think of nothing but Dorothy's words on the long bus ride back to school. As eager as I had been to leave, I couldn't wait to get back there. It wasn't Kansas, but Dorothy and I knew the truth. There's no place like home. A very nice conclusion here. Notice how everything is brought to closure with this particular concluding paragraph. All right, here are some of the errors to avoid in conclusions. Again, avoid a boring mechanical ending, something that is just a bunch of words you've put down because you need to come up with some words. Don't introduce new points or irrelevant material. Okay, by new points, points that are not part of the what has been developed in the body of the essay. Don't just throw something on there. Don't tack on a conclusion. Don't change your position. Some students do that, especially in argumentative essays. They feel like they have pushed the envelope a little bit too much, and so they feel like they need to back off from what they were arguing for, but don't do that. Again, avoid trite expressions, but that's true of any writing, in any paragraph, in any essay. And then finally, obviously, don't insult or anger your reader, and that also is true of any paragraph in any essay that you write in any class.